Freemasonry, you find it's just rife with all kinds of symbolism that involves Illuminati symbolism, Knights Templars, Egyptian, Greek. So they have a distinct historic worldview. The problem with Freemasonry is that it has a large outer circle and a small inner circle. Now, the outer circle does lots of good things. Here in the United States, they have burn centers and hospitals for children, and they're very civic-minded, and that's all well and good. The inner core may have a deeper agenda. But of course, if you ask a Freemason, is there an outer core and an inner core, I guarantee you he's going to tell you no. Because he's either a member of the outer core, in which case he truly does not know there is this inner core elite, or he's a member of the inner core elite and has taken a blood oath not to reveal that. So it's the secrecy of this that causes a lot of people a problem.
You know, ever since the days of John Dee, Queen Elizabeth's, you've probably heard of him, right? Queen Elizabeth's astrologer. We know that the elite in this country have worked with deeply esoteric principles, whether it be the military intelligence services or the Freemasonic circles. There's esoteric knowledge behind a very great deal of what they do.
I hear so often people say, so-and-so is it. It's the Freemasons. It's the this, it's the that. It's not any of them exclusively. This analogy of the spider's web is crucial to understanding it. The spider at the center of the web, all the strands going out from the spider that are different organizations and secret societies. But the key is the web that holds it all together. So if you go high enough, or using the same analogy, deep enough into the web, then the Knights of Malta are the Freemasons. The Freemasons are the Jesuits, because they're one unit working together under different names. Freemasonry is very, very important because it's so vast around the world, and it's a coordinating organization that gets the same things happening in different parts of the world, because it itself is a web. These are webs within webs.
Well, the bloodline question is fundamental again, and the symbols of the bloodline, one of the most important symbols of the bloodline, can be seen and is seen by thousands of tourists in the front of Buckingham Palace. It's the red lion and the white unicorn. The reason for bloodline is simply this: the Atnists were always few, and you can't run the world with just a few people, no matter how evil you are. So you have to have a administrative body. You must have lackeys, you must have minions, you must have lieutenants.
I think that you would have to look to business these days, and I think that you will find that battles still ensue, that religions still want to fight politicians and politicians want to fight religions, and that businessmen are on both sides. I think that you will find that the best places to look are not necessarily the elected politicians, but those unelected ones that we call civil servants. You will find that if you want to talk about bloodlines, there are some incredible bloodlines within the civil service. These are unelected officials which tell our elected officials, supposedly elected officials in our supposed democracy, what to do.
Well, the big battle that's going on in the ruling classes, the political classes at the moment, and the opinion formers, is over what is this new world order going to look like. I don't think anyone is saying that the world is going to stay the same, because we're seeing economic meltdown, we're seeing increased political integration, but there's a contest for what kind of new world order we're going to have. Now, personally, I think we're not in any situation where having some kind of world government at the moment would be a good idea, because it seems that the ruling classes and the more right-wing elements in the ruling class have really taken over that idea.
This is a mentality that would be quite ready to take down the whole planet in one battle between what would be perceived as good and evil. And that's clear in some of the mentality of Christian leaders like Tony Blair, who will quite happily bomb 10,000 people to save them for civilization, the project. And we see it in Afghanistan, where the pursuit of the Taliban, well, there's a whole village in the way, and unfortunately, you know, it got bombed. But it's that kind of mentality on a larger scale. It's the same. It doesn't matter when you're playing the top game, whether it's 100 people in a wedding party in a village, whether it's a convoy of refugees in Bosnia, whether it's 100,000, whether it's 3,000 people in a skyscraper, even if they're your own people. There isn't your own people at that level.
For me, I don't want to sit and go, you know, these are the guys. I mean, you can sit and you can say, well, look, yeah, it's the Rothschilds, it's the Rockefellers, right? It's the Carnegies, it's the Freemasons. Yes, it is. It's also IBM, it's Hewlett-Packard, it's Sun, it's the tech companies, it's Mobil, it's Exxon. What has happened is the New World Order now is also multinational companies that operate above governments. So when you look at who actually does, and what's a really good provable point, is who does the census for the US? It's IBM. And they also get to GPS your front door as a bonus, right? Who does the census for Australia? It's IBM. And who does the census for Communist China? It's IBM. So here you have a company that operates above government and uses people's details supposedly in countries that are meant to be in conflict. So there's the New World Order at play. You have this illusion that you have China and America actually conflicting and fighting, or, you know, like allies but not really allies, yet the same company's doing the census. Like, so who's really running the show?
Though alternative media is on the increase, the mainstream networks and foundations have their own agenda, and they continue to tighten their grip around the unsuspecting public. Using icons of film and TV to subtly promote certain behaviors, you might think more people would be aware of the deception. But the New World Order is relentless in its endeavor, and the people are cleverly distracted like an audience in a hypnotist's sideshow.
Often journalists are blamed for the content in the newspapers and on broadcast and stuff which is broadcast too, and actually they are just pawns in some ways in this game, which increasingly is happening in the mainstream media, where big corporations are simply bought and sold on the open market for their political influence, and that's happening increasingly. I think there's a less and less trust from the British public in the press, and really that decay in the accountability of our media began probably in the early 1980s under Thatcher.
If you don't agree with Fox News, right, you're out of the hive, right? So how can you not believe mainstream news, right? So the hive mind is always working. It's working in many programs all the time. So if you don't believe the war on terror, there's another program it's running, right? If you don't believe, you know, taking vaccines is good for your children, well, you know, there's another person that's not a drone or a worker bee that needs to be brought into the collective. So there's all these programs that are working to bring you into this order out of chaos world, right? And the function of it is that you have no function. That's the function. The function is that you cease to operate as an individual, and you do as you're told, because that's what the hive dictates. What the queen bee does or wants, the queen bee gets. And the queen bee too can also be replaced, because it doesn't matter about the queen, it matters about the hive and how the hive functions.
I think that we have a world full of children, that it's about time that they started to work things out and stop listening to a lot of the junk that's fed to them. Because I don't think that the junk is necessarily being fed to them in the food, although it is, without doubt. I think a lot of the junk is coming through all the mediums, radio, TV, internet, newspapers, whatever medium. That's where the junk's really coming from.
It is such a fundamental foundation of this whole conspiracy. Keep from people, by controlling education, by controlling the mainstream media, information, and by controlling mainstream science big time through funding, not least funding, you keep from the people the true, vast, infinite, all possibility nature of reality, and you tell them this is what it is, and they live their lives thinking constantly, can't be done, I can't do this, that's impossible, and it just keeps them in the pen.
When it comes to the theme of mind control or even mass control, and it's mechanics, it's almost hard to find examples because it's all that. It's ubiquitous. Almost every word that's used, not only the portrayal of certain archetypes, animals, women, men, races, but even the use of certain talismanic words, and I'm including faster, bigger, better, greater, younger, healthier, all sorts of talismanic words, and I used to teach children this, to observe this, waking them up to the fact that these terms are being used a lot in the media. But again, seeking for examples, it's every second. It's not one example, it's multiple. There's a whole barrage of this, coming out of Hollywood, coming out of Madison Avenue. What's happening in the mainstream is that idea that I represent you, Jon Stewart represents you, X represents you, is a Pied Piper concept. Does he really represent you? Do you want such a person to represent you? And if you do, then is he not completely now in control of your allegiances and your affiliations, you see? And they can steer them in a very much Pied Piper way, wherever they want to go, sometimes this way, sometimes that way, like those cops you used to see at the corner or in the center of streets with the white armbands. This is the road they don't want you to go down, but this is the route they do want you to take. And so through this particular mechanism, and I do see it in shows very much like The Daily Show, and also in the more pernicious types like the Bill O'Reilly syndrome. But people need to become very observant of this. Glenn Beck, not that these people don't have important and brilliant things to say, and after all they're journalists, they collate and summate, and it's good to poke fun, and be the court jester, but you're still in the court. You're still serving the boss.
War on terror. Fear of, is he a terrorist? Is he a terrorist? Am I going to get blown up on the underground? You've got fear of your fellow human beings. This is a fear in the feeling realm. And then we've had imposed upon us a fear of our life system, support systems, fear of the environment. Can I trust this water? Is it fluoridated? Can I trust this food? Is it irradiated? That's a fear of life, the life systems, yeah? But that fear is based, for example, like global warming, the whole debate about climate change and global warming, on our thoughts. What do we understand the truth to be?
Well, the question of fear is very important. In fact, it might even be fundamental, because as Frank Herbert, the author, said, fear is the mind killer. And so the constant rug pulling, economically, socially, military, is a key part of all of this. Coming from a psychological background, I always distinguish fear from anxiety. I think it's important because fear ultimately is something external. You're afraid of things that are external. You're anxious about something internal. So yes, there's the certain architecture of fear and the installation and influx of fear on the external level. Oh my goodness, the economy. Oh my goodness, strange enemies at the gates. Oh my God, towers are burning, etc., etc., etc. My focus is much more on what is the concomitant of that within the psyche. And when you get into the question of anxiety, you then are really following an important thread there, because the anxiety question is age-old again. You're going back to a very long time, before this era, before the 20th century, into how anxiety, a person has been kept in perpetual anxiety. Of course, people in the lower class will say, well, there's nothing more anxiety than not being able to, make your own ends meet, and not being able to feed your kids, and potentially having to go off and die in foreign wars, etc., etc., etc. But more specifically, anxiety is what you're doing to yourself. Anxiety is based on your relationship between you and your own psyche. They take an already fragmented, already traumatized, already insecure person and barrage him again and again and again until his entire thinking is shut down. What happens is that his concept of time becomes traumatized, fragmented, disabled. He's anxious about the future, he's forgetful about the past. What also happens is that his brain is overstimulated now. What happens now, he's overstressed physically, his body breaks down. In other words, his immunity on a total, again, we've talked about the war of consciousness, or I've talked about the war of consciousness in my work. This is what it's all about. We're getting to the heart of the matter here. Once this immunity wholesale is lower, then you have the perfect slave, and he can be led towards a global village, or he can be led into complete servitude. In fact, he can even be led to die, in a completely willful state. He can willfully go to die for your causes.
What the conspiracy, because the people behind the conspiracy understand how all this works. Their bottom line, their foundation of this entire conspiracy is to disconnect mind from consciousness, which is like going on the internet and instead of the guy at the keyboard deciding where he goes, the computer's now deciding. Even more than that, the computer's now deciding what you think of the websites when you get there. In other words, the computer has taken over. The machine, if you want to call it that, it's far more than that, but the machine has taken over.
The techniques of control used by the New World Order are becoming more advanced. With huge technological advances in medicine and computers, these two areas are key in the manipulation of the human consciousness. While human beings have the ability to use such technology to better our existence, there will be and always have been those individuals and corporations who wish to use it as a tool of control and discipline.
You basically have got, IBM actually started as a census company in 1896 by a gentleman called Herman Hollerith. It started basically as a census company. So what they did is they got a contract with the US Census Bureau. They then evolved that into an actual tabulating machine. And what a tabulating machine is really a computer in its earliest form. So the punch card system was basically a software engineered program, in a sense, where the Nazi regime would come to Thomas Watson from IBM and say, look, what we want is a punch card system that can document race, lineage, occupation, location, inventory, create the punch card systems for us. So kind of like in software engineering, you go to your program and you say, look, this is what we want, right? And the end result is, verification, validation, and the software program is produced. So what would happen is you'd have different punch cards depending on what the Nazi regime actually wanted. Now, what makes IBM totally guilty in this basic transaction is IBM didn't actually sell the Hollerith machines to Nazi Germany. They leased them. So you had over 2,000, Hollerith machines on basically all, from Auschwitz to all the camps. And being able to actually process 64,000 cards per hour, right, you could basically, within 1 hour, find all the Polish people who were, let's say, of one particular occupation that were Jewish or were Gypsy or African Negro. So what you could then do is, utilising that data, you could then basically start metering out the people and utilising the information as power. So the census itself wasn't only limited to horse, livestock, cow. You actually had the Germans were out to find out the commodity for butter, like where was the butter stored, and the Danes were the actual guys that were hoarding all the butter. So what people need to do is look at IBM of what they accomplished with processing power of 64,000 cards per hour, and now we have the Blue Gene processors that can process 22.8 trillion computations a second, right? So just have a think about that.
People who've accepted this conspiracy talk about the microchip being a device to track people. I keep saying all the time, there's never one reason for anything that these people do. Yes, on one level it's about tracking people, absolutely, but it's not only about that. It's about getting access to the body computer system, which is a electrochemical organism, and manipulating it mentally, emotionally and physically through the chip.
When you look at the eugenics program in the 40s, it was a case of let's get as much information of you as possible. Now we have IBM releasing things like the DNA transistor, which is just, you know, probably announced, I'd say, about a month or so ago, where they can actually reverse engineer your genome for roughly $1,000 to $100. So once you biometrically harvest everyone, you're right, and you've got your iris scan, your retina scan, your gait, your odour scan, your odour biometrics, sorry, etc. Right, from there on, what do they want? They want more. So they want your heart rhythm scan, they want your brain scan, they want you. So it goes from external biometrics to internal biometrics, and then eventually the holy grail is your genome, right? So once they've got the genome, IBM has then gone on record that we can actually now tailor vaccines to your genome.
When you start going down that way of thinking, you know, that is going down an Orwellian nightmare. That is going down to become Hitler's wet dream. You know, Hitler, armed with this technology, you know, he started to put in, how can we track individuals? How can we track things? He wanted to have systems to put barcodes, if you like, or numbers on each individual item. Why? Well, there's a lot of spectacles, a lot of objects that were discovered and found when they started eradicating people.